So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are connecting from. To introduce myself, I'm Shashidhar. I'm part of Citrix Ready technical team. Today, we will see how Galath will help in proactive management of Citrix end user experience in a hybrid IT environment. And we have been working with Galath for some time, so let's see how this will help in complete management of the Citrix environments. So today we are joined with Lee Gates, uh, the senior director of technical operations from Glad Technologies, who will be walking us through this webinar, and I'll be facilitating this as well. So I would like to thank everyone for attending this webinar today, and I would like to welcome you all to this Citrix Ready Technical webinar series, wherein we showcase how Citrix and our partners have integrated to deliver valuable products and solutions to common problems faced by our customers today. So to speak about Citrix Ready program, as you all might be knowing, like Citrix Ready is an end-to-end technology partner program that showcases and recommends third-party products, solutions, and services that demonstrate compatibility with Citrix products. Customers can quickly and easily find solutions recommended by Citrix in the Citrix Ready marketplace by navigating to citrixready.citrix.com. And for more information about the program, you can navigate to citrix.com/partnerprogram/citrixready. So before we start this presentation, I would like to mention that we have few questions during this webinar, or we will take up these questions right at the end in the Q&A session. So please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A section in the GoToWebinar window. So without any further delay, let me welcome Lee. Lee, over to you.
Thanks so much, Shashi. So we do have a couple items coming up ahead of us that Shashi mentioned. I just want to talk a little bit more specifically about what we're going to be covering in this webinar. And so we just have a couple things to talk a little bit about Goliath ourselves. And then right after that, we're going to delve a little bit into what it means to proactively manage the end user experience in a hybrid environment, and how we kind of take that approach of reactive versus proactive. At that point in time, we have a series of use cases we're going to share with you about how our customers have approached this challenge that we'll go through, and then we'll have a Q&A session at the very end. So just a couple quick bullet points about Goliath, because you always have to have that marketing slide in there. But there's a couple key things I wanted to share with you guys. We've been proud to be Citrix partners actually since 2011, 2012, and been working with the team there, which has been fantastic. The company's been around since 2010. We have over 500 customers. But the key thing that you should really take away from this is the fact that what we actually do, what we're really passionate about and we focus on, is helping our customers prevent end user experience issues. That's the main focus of our technology. We also look to help and empower our customers to achieve that by anticipating, troubleshooting, and preventing end user experience problems, whether it's problems in the IT infrastructure at the application level or the end users themselves. And generally, those problems that we're helping them resolve really kind of fall into the categories of logon initiation, logon duration, and session performance. We'll take a look a little bit about that today. One of the main points that I brought up in just a few moments ago was the concept of being proactive. And when we talk about proactive, it's obviously as opposed to reactive. And in the context of a hybrid environment, and certainly with the challenges with managing these complex infrastructures, legacy solutions that have been reactive and current and modern solutions are proactive have a different approach. And some of that manifests starting at the very beginning from an alerting perspective. And very basically where you have tools that have been out there for some time that give you the ability to identify and alert on events or failures that are taking place. Well, getting proactive means adding in the capability to actually contextually understand that with conditions that are occurring as well. Furthermore, usually what ends up happening with the tools that are present that our customers have had in the past is that they find out about a problem, they get data a little bit later, and they're kind of looking back on the issue that's already taken place. Well, the goal with a proactive solution is to be able to identify issues before it affects the users, setting thresholds defined on trigger points that are actually identified before it's going to start impacting the users themselves, and then be able to execute remediation actions too. And we'll talk a little bit about those as we go into some of those, into some of the solutions that we have in the use cases. Furthermore, very often these are decentralized solutions with no ability to actually kind of give an idea or impossible to anticipate solutions. And so having a centralized solution that's built to pull information from all the disparate components that impact the delivery of the applications and the experience of the end users from a single console is really, really important. Real-time visibility as well, being able to get to all those different layers and so you can go broad and deep is important too. And then furthermore, the last item here is getting some detailed information with respect to real-time performance information into dashboards and reports so that you can actually troubleshoot the information as quickly as possible. So that's the whole basis of proactive versus reactive, and some of that will come through as we go through the scenarios and the technology itself. Now, one of the things that we've seen with our customers is they're looking more broader than just managing infrastructure that's just on their site. Maybe they have hosted applications, they've got multiple data centers, they're starting to leverage cloud platforms such as AWS or Azure, and so they've got assets that are spread all over the place. And so not having solutions or one of the challenges being the need to be able to have a single console to see everything, right, so you can actually make correlations is a key concern. And being able to have the right historical information so you can actually manage all those different platforms from a single place, spot trends and patterns, and getting all the relevant metrics is really important too. And so our solution is focused on giving you that centralized view, single console to give you both a high-level dashboard with some of the deeper analytical information, but they also quickly identify trends that are taking place so you can make those proactive decisions with alerting and thresholding around all of that. So no matter where the problem manifests at whatever layer or whatever part of the architecture, we can bring you that information and insight. So to talk a little bit more about how this really comes together and how this manifests in our technology, and from a workflow perspective as an administrator, we have a series of case studies we're going to take you through that kind of bring this all into context. So I'm going to go through actually the first two case studies before I actually take you into the demonstration itself. And so these two different use cases, there's certain similarities, but there's some key differentiation between them. So the first one that we have here is a nonprofit health system. They have about 40,000 daily active concurrent users at any point in time of the day, and of course it's a hospital, so it's 24/7. But they're delivering their key application, which was Meditech, over Zen app. It was hosted on Zen server, and the big issue they have is making sure that they always know what's actually happening. Because this has to be available 24/7, whenever changes take place, it's going to affect somebody if there is something done in a fashion that's not fully exercised or fully tested out. And so the likelihood of a doctor or a nurse knowing about a problem first was really kind of impacting the ability at the end of the day to deliver patient care, good patient care. So what they did is they deployed our technology to test on a continuous basis. And they had time frames that were really in the slower time frame, which would be in the middle of the night. And this was a national organization, so they had different time zones for testing some of these starting at different times. So starting at 4:30 a.m., which would be falling through those maintenance periods, they would actually have a series of tests that would take place. And so I'm going to take you through how we actually use our technology. It was actually deployed at all the different hospital locations so that they can understand if there's going to be someone impacted, and more importantly, if it was a regional issue, if it was a hospital-specific problem, or broader, there's a specific problem that was going to affect everybody. I'll take you through that use case and how that actually worked out. The other use case I'm going to take you through is for an airline. It's a global airline. They had a problem with that they had issues in general before they acquired our technology about getting and anticipating issues that are going to affect the performance of all of those users. There's no way of getting advanced notification. And because most of their users were remote, they needed a solution that would kind of enable them to kind of mimic that type of a context. So we actually deployed our technology out into Amazon AWS, different data centers covering different regions to give them visibility, and also test out all those different characteristics, GSLB, going to different data centers, what are the implications, and so we'll show you how we use our technology to get proactive alerting for them so that they knew about problems in advance, or at least without users complaining about it, because generally they wouldn't, and be able to give them objective evidence along the way so they can stay ahead of these issues. So I'm going to transition into the technology at this point, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how that comes up. you should see my screen here in just a moment. Bringing up the technology itself. So this is our logon simulator of application availability monitoring. I'm going to talk about the healthcare scenario first before I go into the airline one. And just as a quick recap, the customer had our technology deployed to make sure that they knew about problems before the doctors would complain about it. Because again, if they can't get into the technology, that affects patient care. It causes them to spend a lot more time with actually troubleshooting these issues that are taking place. So at each one of those sites, and perhaps to give you a little bit better context, we had on the endpoints at each one of those hospitals a test that was running, and it actually sign in just like the doctors and nurses would, so that it would kind of catch the same types of conditions by exercising the same workflow that doctors and nurses would run through. And so from each one of those endpoints, it actually run through the sequence, and you can see this video that's on the screen right now. It's actually going through that process, signing in, going through the process of launching the application itself, and validating what's going on along the way. So at this point, it's bringing up the profile, it's going in and bringing up different characteristics, any drive mappings that are there, until it actually finally brings up the application itself. And it's actually doing this entire thing without a user sitting there, but it's the same process that a user would run through until the application comes up and we can validate that the user should be able to get into the app itself. By going through that sequence of events, it's effectively validating that the users can actually get through the NetScaler. It's actually able from the NetScaler to go through the communicate and get to the storefront. It's able to enumerate the application. SQL on the back end is working. Authentication has happened. The ICA file gets downloaded. The communication back through again is established up to the session host, and the session comes up live, and all the pieces in between. So it's this very simple process that takes a couple of seconds is actually testing out a lot of different characteristics just to get to this point. And we're doing tests along the way. There's also certain types of events and conditions that can happen, especially in these types of complex environments where errors and faults, whether it's licensing related or there's a proxy change or something on the NetScaler side was modified to align with other changes in the architecture that might impact end users. Well, all those things as they pass down get picked up on the endpoint, and a simulation or technology that's actually monitoring all of that is able to pick up those conditions so that you know about them, even though they don't get necessarily logged anyplace else. And what actually happened at one point along the way is that the applications the users had couldn't actually be launched. And the fact that we had a simulation running every 10 minutes from every single site caught at this moment that the problem took place. The app team actually ran an update, which resulted in a problem in the application being published. We sent an alert notification, so this dashboard here kind of gives visibility to what's going on in the environment. So you can see all the different sessions that are launching, how long it's taking to execute. It's giving us a breakdown at the bottom here for each one of those stages, what's the average time. And then we also have the availability. So at around 4:30 a.m. one of those days, we saw this cliff off to nothing, and the application was completely unavailable. What we allowed the end user to do, our administrators to do, is to go into analysis, bring up our technology, through our technology, bring up analysis, and then drill down into it to find out more about what's happening. Now on this page, we can adjust timeline, just bring in current date, the current day from the beginning to now. We can actually sort this by different applications, any of the endpoints that are out there, and then actually drill down from there into whatever that specific item is. So we can identify something that's either slow or failed, and when we click on the icon here, we can see more about what might have caused that event to take place. So this is giving us some more details. In the case of the customer where it had failed out, we were able to see each one of those different stages. The icon changed from blue to red, and so this is breaking down each one of the stages. So the page coming up, the authentication phase, and you can see here this passing through the credentials. If there's disclaimers along the way, we'll handle that. So if you get like an unexpected error message or an unexpected step of the process, we'll identify that for you. The storefront loads up. It goes actually finds the application. And then in this case, it actually brings up the application itself, and we get some validation that it did truly fully launch. In this case of this customer, we never found that application. And so when we came to this page, it's gone through the navigation steps. They had a number of folders and such. So we actually clicked over to the apps, and we were able to see very quickly that the application was not listed in the set of apps that were present. Furthermore, because it was a favorited app, we could also see from the very beginning that it wasn't showing up on this initial list as well. That told us that the application became unpublished. Now, it was 4:30 a.m., so that meant that they still had time to go and resolve the problem. Turned out that the application team had made some changes, caused the application to become unpublished. They wrote to republish the application, and so it was only really affecting maybe a couple of users in the midnight. And really, they were able to get that resolved pretty quickly. Low impact to users, certainly not the peak 40,000 users that they had getting impacted by it. And before they signed in started coming in for the shift around 7 a.m., everything was fine. They didn't have a million events flooding the help desk. It was all taken care of. So this was really critical to that process so they can actually understand. As you can imagine, having this objective evidence telling them about what's going on, what's planned, what's taking place, and being able to go in and actually prove it is huge, especially when you're working with application teams. As you can imagine, again, at 4:30 a.m., waking someone up from the application team, pretty grumpy, they're probably going to come back and say, no, it's totally fine. I don't know what you're talking about. But having this picture-based evidence, a screenshot that shows them, look, it's literally not there anymore, helps kind of get past some of those conversations, really kind of reduces the time frame it takes to troubleshoot and have that dialogue and allow them to move on. Now, in the case of the folks that were that airline that just needed to have some objective evidence and wanted to know when things were going wrong, from where, being able to dissect some of those characteristics, these screens were really quite critical. And so from a scheduling perspective, when we went through that aspect of it, one of the great things that we have is we have an easy-to-use scheduling functionality to help them get this set up. So they have a couple core applications that are delivering the actual suite of apps for managing reservations and managing the ticketing and all those different components. And so we had simulations that were set up from multiple locations. So on the endpoint list here, we had each one of those different sites and different data centers across the globe defined here. Now, because we're going through different data centers and different time zones, we're actually passing the information through, going through GSLB, ending up at different destinations. And so this allows us to track what was set up on each one of those endpoints, the scheduling, when was it running. So we have some visual indicator to make sure that we were going through the entire sequence, that we're covering the entire time range. For that matter, when you're running through simulations, they're running every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes, trying to get that time as squeezed as tight as possible so you have as many simulations running so you're always testing. This is invaluable to be able to identify exactly what's happening and how frequent that is, and you're not going to be stepping on top of another launch that's going to take place. So this allows us to do that in a very easy-to-use visual manner to get things set up. It allows them to manage it themselves, make changes, and if they make a change to something, maybe adding additional applications or it's going to take longer to run, they can see how it might step on another simulation that's going to execute. So when we went into the dashboard then for that customer, this was the main screen that they used. Because of a good high-level visibility, is the environment up? Is there any problems that are taking place? So they have an idea of what that is. If there's events that are taking place that might impact the users and that entire sequence and that experience, like for instance here bringing up the resources page where it starts to list and build up the storefront page, etc. This is really valuable to help them know that, hey, we can maybe optimize this and that's where we should be focusing our time. That's what's taking a long assignment in the entire sequence of events for them to actually get the application launched. So this helps give them some of that visibility, but it also gives them an idea that, hey, everything is good, and when problems start to happen, they can go back to look and see, is this isolated? Is this something that might be affecting everybody? Because oftentimes when one person calls in saying there's an issue, prior to having a technology like this, they didn't have anything objective that told them that, is this a larger issue or is this a user-specific problem? And so being able to look here and say, as the user calls and says, I can't get in, they have an immediate understanding of how broad this problem is. They can see that everything else is up and start troubleshooting from there. In circumstances where there were changes that take place, because again, in a large global organization like that, there's many different hands involved in the process. And so there were circumstances where the entire system would go down, but for certain endpoints and certain environments. And so going into analysis, they had the ability to start to understand those characteristics and start to modify it accordingly. So they can say, okay, give it to me from one destination versus another, one of those data centers, whether it's a European one, the West Coast data center, or the one in the East Coast or Central. So they'll just isolate these accordingly. The different columns and such, they'll start understanding where those issues were, so they can sort that on that basis and then further filter this down so they understood exactly when those problems were happening and then be able to drill down and kind of isolate those conditions. And then, of course, when those problems were going on, whether it was slowness or some part of it failing, we could actually drill down into a little bit deeper to see exactly what is happening along the way. Now, when it was going through this process, there were circumstances where there was changes that took place and no one could get in. This availability line was basically flatline 0. And when they came in and the launch process here, they saw very quickly that they were getting some client-side errors. At one point, they had some licensing issues. Another point, they had problems with the proxy, and then they made some changes on the networking side. They never updated all the configuration, so those error messages come up. This is just taking a step back for a second. That's really important because whenever these events happen, more often than not, the Citrix team gets blamed and says that, hey, Citrix is not working, when that's not really true at all. It's just a configuration change. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. And by having this data, they're able to go back and immediately identify, oh, you made a change, and now this is not working, and we know exactly where to focus our attention. So having this evidence was very important, especially when those macro events, to understand really how is this breaking down. Oftentimes, because they'd go through this in cycles, one of the set of NetScalers might be an older version, and another one that was just updated might be fine, but the newer one's not. And understanding that, hey, when we're coming through this entire process, all those connections that are going to pass through those NetScalers because of GSLB are going to be experiencing that issues. So this was really important for that characteristic to understand where in that process it was happening. And again, when apps would not enumerate, or at times when they would go to launch and it would not actually come up successfully, they had profile errors that would take place. This is going to present all those characteristics here. So we know immediately that there's either profile problems, there's issues of loading something up, there's a Windows level error, there's a server that's down, a ZenApp server that's down, maybe it's down for maintenance, but they didn't probably put it into maintenance. All those different circumstances become a lot easier to identify because we can break that information down. And so being able to come back here, especially when those conditions were happening, was really helpful for them to understand what was taking place. So in the case of that customer, that's exactly how they approached it. So going back to our slides here for just a moment, just a quick recap. In the case of the customer that was a healthcare, on the healthcare side of things, their application wasn't enumerating, and so we sent alert notifications to the fact we didn't find those applications. And you can see it here. Actually, we sent some of those alerts popped up on their phones, and they got, there was a change, there was an issue, the application was not found. Immediately, straight before they knew what the problem was, they can go and actually identify that. And then in the case of the airline, they were able to start seeing that the problem is that when there was issues, they would get advanced notification before users started to come in, because those reservation agents started more of like a 8 to 8 o'clock type of a schedule. So as changes took place overnight, they had information immediately following those events, what was different, what wasn't working, and more often than not, it's more about being able to know that, hey, everything is fine, and globally, this is a user-specific problem. So they had that type of basis of understanding. Now, one of our other customers, moving on to the next use case, had a DaaS offering, right? So what they have is a managed solution that provides desktop as a service called Anywhere App, this MTM, and they needed to be able to ensure uptime and compliance and SLAs, right? So if users called saying that it's slow, they had to have a way to manage that and get data points respective to that customer, that user, as opposed to the broader set of customers and the overall service to understand where the problem is. Is it service level? Is it user specific? Is it customer specific? And so they needed a solution that's going to allow them to see all those different characteristics. So combination of reports and alerting and visibility to see all the different key pieces that were coming together to help deliver that. So with that in mind, let's take a look a little bit at how we help provide them that type of visibility to ensure uptime and compliance with their SLAs. So digging down a little bit here, we're going to transition from the application availability monitoring into the ZenApps and desktop and the Citrix-specific monitoring that's taking place inside of those environments. So we're going to slide over here. Okay, so you should be seeing the rest of the technology here, the ZenApps and desktop session display. So there's a couple things that come into this display. We have the app servers, the published apps and desktops, and VDI. Now, in this case, they're delivering VDI for their customers. And there's a couple specific circumstances that happened. Users call up saying that they couldn't get in. It took a long time to get in. There was slowness. And so this was the main screen that they used to help identify some of those conditions that were going on. And from this display, we can see both in real time and historically the circumstances that are happening and how that all kind of came together. And so this is a key aspect of that process to get that type of visibility in these situations. So it's used by the help desk to find out what's happening. You have the ability at the bottom here to do a search to look up different users. You can change the time frame. So if a user calls up and says, hey, I can't get in, or it's slow and it happened last week, or it's been going on for a month, never mind the fact they haven't called you for a month, but you can actually change the time range here at the top so that you could see, going back to August, whatever the different circumstances for a given user. So we can bring that data together in this one single display. And when that comes up, we can actually drill down into those user sessions to find out more about what happened. And you can see some of those sessions here on the right-hand side. We can see how it's changing over time. And then we have some of the key data points that are present here. Whenever there's a slowness event that happens, and we talked about earlier reactive versus proactive and how do we get the right metrics. One of the key tenets was how do you get the right metrics, both broad and deep, to be able to understand what's going on such that you can prevent the problems or at least address them immediately and prevent it from happening again in the future. So in order to bring the necessary data together to identify that and kind of combat the whole prospect of Citrix being slow when it's usually not, this is a key part. We bring together data from the hypervisor, from Citrix, from the app layer, and from the OS, so you can find out what's happening. This initial part of it gives us some initial context. We can see the addresses that are coming in from the Citrix client version. A lot of times you have customers or end users that may be on an old deprecated Citrix receiver version that the organization is not supporting anymore. And before you do anything else, this can often help identify that circumstance so you don't waste any time. Right away, you have the name of the user, receiver version they were using there. This happens a lot when you have users that can work from home as well, and they say, hey, it's slow or it sucks every time I go home. You look it up and you can see, yep, they're not on the corporate IP address. You can see the Citrix client version, and you can see some of the other details. And then when we drill down, we get all the key metrics. So from here, we can really kind of dig down to find out what the user's experience truly is and what's going on. So these are the core metrics from an end user experience perspective, whether it's related to their connection itself, logon duration, what they're doing. We break open the ICA channel so you can get visibility to what they're actually doing inside the session, how the resources are allocated to the user. So is it truly something as a service provider, as MTM is, as a DaaS provider that might be impacting, that they have control over, application performance, so you can see a little bit deeper into what they're doing inside those sessions. So in these types of circumstances, I'll take you through how they kind of help with logon problems and then connection performance issues or session-related issues that have occurred. So from a logon perspective, there's some data that we're getting that covers a number of different aspects. We're certainly looking at logon duration, but we're also breaking down very into the deep minutiae of what's going on in the process from the delivery controller side of things and the Citrix receiver side of things on the endpoint. And when they end up on that session host, what's actually happening once they're actually trying to bring up their profile, authenticate through AD, and get the actual application or desktop they're supposed to have access to. So at the top here, we have a great way of quickly breaking down some of the different stages that are occurring. But then we can break that down a little bit further because this doesn't really kind of give you all the data points you need as far as why did it take 90 seconds. So when we dig down a little bit further, we're going to start getting a little bit more evidence and understanding what's happening. So right away, we can see that logon script execution and profile load is taking 60 seconds. So that's the majority of the time frame of what's happening. And so that's clearly leaking over into the desktop startup phases. So that's what this actually means. Each of these different stages means something a little bit different, from authentication to obtaining those credentials with AD, logon script, the drive mappings, and then the actual desktop load time. So the desktop load time kind of overlaps with profile load and logon script execution. So this is really where the time is coming from, is slowing up everything else. Now what's really cool and interesting is the fact that from the endpoint we get information too. We've seen circumstances where things can happen from that end that are slowing things up. So for instance, the application enumeration on storefront is taking 0.46 seconds. The ICA file download, the name resolution as it's creating the tunnel back through, the time that it took to handle the launch of Citrix Receiver itself. If you've got prompts and additional authentication stages that happen, or disclaimers at the endpoint and users saying that it's slow and maybe it pops up into the background behind it before they see it occur and it comes to the forefront, you'll see that manifest here. If there's problems with the receiver on the endpoint causing issues with actually users signing in, especially in a case like a DaaS provider where you're not going to be able to control those characteristics, this is huge to be able to see what's happening on the user's endpoint during that logon process that might be impacting the overall experience. So Well, in this case, we were able to quickly see that it was a profile load issue. These other issues that are more endpoint related, you get this without having anything on the endpoint. This happens, we're getting all of this from the infrastructure side of things. And so looking then down towards the bottom here, we're going to map out each of those different sequences. It's so common that we see problems with either they're making and optimizing logon scripts and profile loading in that process, that there's other things that are crept in there along the way that starts blowing up the user's logon time. So this is going to break down authentication timeframes, group policy, folder redirection, policy and drive mapping and printer mapping conditions too. If you have old deprecated drive mappings that have gone away but are still present in the user's profile, you'll see these times start to creep up and get a lot larger. I have an example of a case that we ran into from one of our, we kind of worked or helped with the customer with and here you can see how those scripting extensions kind of manifest and create those issues. We've seen other circumstances where authentication is taking a minute, 2 minutes to go through to get back to those domain controllers. So this manifests here, so you can quickly identify them. The key thing here is that we're giving you the data that you can take to go and actually resolve the problems and take action. It's good to know that it's slow, but it's far better to know exactly where in that process the issue is manifesting from. So this helps you kind of quickly distinguish between user and end user related problems with their environment on the endpoint, problems on the brokering where you can add and profiler that you have control over, and then even further to the session host itself. So you can really kind of optimize those characteristics. So this is really important from the distinguishing those different aspects of it. And that's one of the key areas where MTM uses it when users say that it's slow and helping them get some visibility into it. The other side of it is the connection performance, and especially in the circumstance of a DaaS provider, or if you have assets that are going to be hosted in hybrids, if you're doing any kind of using or leveraging AWS, either primarily AWS or you're centralizing your assets into a data center that's separate from where your users are located, or you might start bursting out into cloud in times of high utilization. Getting visibility to how does a connection relate to overall experience is important. So this is going to give us that visibility before you have to actually start digging deeper into the user's behavior. And so the great thing here is that we're getting some great metrics. So Citrix did a great job of instrumenting the protocol to help us distinguish these different characteristics. And so we can see how ICA latency and network latency might actually relate to each other, and then further how the system and the session side of things and the application's responsiveness might be correlating back to it. The great thing about this is very often we've seen circumstances of where connection performance can cause some of that slowness in behavior. And then digging down deeper, we can find out more about contextually what they're doing. And a DaaS provider, we don't have as much control over that. This helps you get an idea of what are they actually doing. They might have given you an idea from a profile that, hey, end users are going to, and this is relevant for any organization as well, right? As you're growing out your deployment or managing images for different users, and you have this list that their administrators said, oh yeah, our users need these printers, they need to be able to scan, they have these high intense applications. Well, this tells you what that really amounts to. So if it starts doing any kind of USB redirection, printing, et cetera, this helps with identifying. Oftentimes we might think that printing something off or copying and pasting files, maybe that's affecting the experience. This allows us to see the user's behavior from the connection side of things and what's using that connection speed. That helps us understand how their behavior relates back to the experience they're having, and how these spikes with either or lack of connection speed might be impacting in the ICA latency and the round trip times. And then from an application performance perspective, very often, for those of you that have worked on the help desk or working with trouble and user issues, from this part of it, we can see very quickly what are the different apps that are open, and more specifically, what are they doing inside of it? Do they have 10 copies of the Outlook inbox open and 10 copies of Excel in the same file open? We're going to grab those titles over for you so you can understand what's actually happening with it and the impact from a CPU memory perspective. And those of you that are focused on high density and optimizing your density on storage and the host, we're also going to give you back the visibility to the IOPS and the throughput those applications are actually hitting their storage with. So there were circumstances where we see high I/O from a host level perspective, and we send alerts and notifications on it. They can drill back down to the user sessions that are on those hosts and who's going to be generating that I/O. So this is helpful from an optimization from an infrastructure side, but also giving you visibility in terms of application performance and experience that's going to, and how that's manifesting up. So these are key aspects to that, and we had monitoring and alerting set up around all those different pieces. So when they went into their dashboard, they had events that are being driven into around applications crashing and hanging. We had alerts around profile and printing utilization, key applications that are in the environment. We have all that data coming back together. You can see them listed here to alert them to those different events that are going on so they know about those problems. They get to the root cause of those issues. What's also cool about these rules and conditions, and especially in a DAS and a hosted environment, is not only can we alert them to them, but we can facilitate the remediation process too. So if it was something simple like a service going down, and oftentimes they'd have automation built in from the service side, onside the session host itself to just restart it, but didn't always work. So we'd actually monitor for those conditions, and then we'd be able to go and we grab it from the kernel level and actually restart the service and resolve that condition. When, especially in a DAS provider in a large organization, you're going to have people bringing all sorts of weird things to their sessions. They go and buy a printer at Staples and hook it up to their session and wonder why it doesn't work or it starts to hang. So we're going to start looking for those types of conditions and monitoring those processes so we can identify how that might be impacting it. So we can also execute functions at that level to find out, hey, is there a problem with one of those different components of it, using up high resource utilization for an extended period of time, and the moment that that happens, we can certainly let you know about it, but we can also execute remediation. So if the application gets hung, we can kill the process, and if there's a corresponding service, then restart it as well. Or in the case of, again, printing, SPLWow64.exe gets stuck, right? So you have a 32-bit driver running on there, gets stuck, starts leaking CPU memory, kill the process, restart the print spooler, clear the print queue, and then bring it back up and live again, and the user doesn't even know about it. Especially in these larger types of organizations, those simple tasks, where we take the first step either to gather more data or start the first step in the resolution process, helps with you being able to kind of get to the bottom of these problems, and at least the user's issues are resolved. You can go back and get to the deeper level issue afterwards while their conditions are being managed. So all of this information comes back together. We're facilitating that entire set of actions. And MTM had the ability to kind of manage and get visibility into all of that from our single dashboard. We can see here all the different users, all the different groups that they had, the different state of what's going on, the problems that are going on, and so they can see each one of those customers broken out here, who's good, who has a problem, and then work in from there. So this is a huge part of that process of maintaining that visibility, making sure they know that everything is healthy and good. It's real time, so the moment something goes red, they can also begin that process from their side before waiting for users to call in. So they can drill down to see all those different characteristics, whether, again, it's the host, the apps, the VMs, those different components. So going back to the use case for just a moment here, this allows them to kind of get that key visibility, troubleshoot those issues that were taking place, but also be able to have a centralized dashboard that gives them a broad level of visibility to understand, especially in their multi-tenant environment, all those different customers, what we saw in the product itself, broken down to understand what was taking place, what is their health. So we also work with a large media company, and they had a slightly different type of a situation. The challenge that they're running into, and this is something we hear pretty common, they have random but persistent slowness. They can't track it back to a single set of users. They might have it down to a region, perhaps, but they can't really find out what's actually happening. So getting down to the root cause analysis, to be able to do a root cause analysis and the full visibility required to do so was just simply not possible with their existing tool set. So initially, they got some alert notifications about ICA latency. They tried throwing more resources at Citrix, but of course, Citrix was running fine. So they couldn't really quite figure out what was causing it. So they used our technology to be able to analyze the information historically and in real time to get to the root cause of it. I'll show you how we got to the root cause of that, how the data came together. So we're going to actually go back to the technology now and take a look at a little bit how this information comes together. So going back into the Zen app and Zen desktop session display here, and we'll actually bring this up historically. So what they actually did is they actually had a condition that was taking place at a set of users. So we were able to put in the name of the user, go back in time, see all the different sessions that took place in that time frame and bring them up. So, and these were the users that they had that were complaining the most about experience. Now in their case, we were actually focused a little bit more on the ICA latency, some of the resource consumption. We wanted to be able to kind of take a holistic look at it, isolate to where the problems are manifesting, what are the conditions that are taking place. And so from here, we're able to kind of drill down and take a look at very closely what was taking place inside of those sessions. And these tabs that we had around the connection performance, server performance, and the application performance were really kind of key. Now, these users were in India, so we expected there to be some network latency and some connection issues. Now, the overall process here took place over the course of a month, and I'll explain why it took that time frame. When we first started working with them, we saw the obligatory 190 to 250 milliseconds of network latency, which you always expect going to that part of the world. That was driving all the ICA latency and the round trip time. These all matched. These three are really kind of a combination of each other, and what's underscoring all of it is network latency. Anything above network latency is going to be first on the ICA latency side with server resources. Can it handle all the users' connections coming in and processing and passing it out? Anything above that is going to be the round trip times from the application side of things and the OS layer in terms of its responsiveness. And in their case, all of it was being driven by network latency. And these values, though, were still within the margin. So it's within the 190 to 250 milliseconds we expect for that part of the world. However, what we saw on the connection side is that they had about 1 to 5 megabit per second of connection speed. And anytime that got less, network latency would go up exponentially. That would drive the ICA latency through the roof, and of course, they'd have a slower session. And so that was further evidence, and whenever that happens, the question becomes, well, how much bandwidth are they pushing? Are they doing a lot of activity that's maybe straining it even further, and it's not just a network problem? Of course, there's always the network team saying this. But is there something that they're doing that's not that's resulting in that behavior or making it or exacerbating it? So going into the ICA channel here was very, very important because it allowed us to see what the users were up to. Now, what they were supposed to be doing was all financial analysis and things of that nature was not going to be very intensive from a bandwidth perspective. Anything of that nature that's kind of more static, more data-driven, it's going to use less than about 400 to 500 kilobit per second. If it starts getting a little bit image-heavy, static images and things of that nature, you can get up to 800 kilobit per second, and then between 800 to 1.2 megs per second, they're probably online and browsing, ads popping up, starting into the area of what are you really doing, when you're talking to the end user. Anything above that is going to end up being video high-frequency changes on the actual screen itself. So either clicking around like mad, changing out all the pixels on the screen, or they've got a video playing. In the case of these users, we're able to show objectively that they're using Citrix within the bounds of how they should, less than that 450, 500 kilobit per second range, which should have been easily managed and handled by the connection speed that they had. So we're able to show that, hey, the users are absolutely fine. They're using Citrix the way they should be. When we see spikes, it's the occasional report getting printed off, and even then, it only gets to about a couple hundred kilobits per second. And we can see each one of these. So ThinWire, by the way, is a presentation driver. So you can see how all of that is lining up with the bandwidth utilization. And these other spikes that are down here is data coming back in. We have seen circumstances with users. We had a case with one customer where they had consumers or users complaining about slowness. We went into this level of view. The ThinWire bandwidth is up around 2.5 to 5 megs per second. One case is up to 8 megs per second. And in all those circumstances, including this one, we go into the application performance side. In the case of the high utilization, they had YouTube videos that they were playing. Now, it happened to be for a legitimate reason for work. I mean, we could actually see it said YouTube, and it said the name of the video at the top, and we knew it was work-related. It wasn't like they were on ESPN and watching, fantasy football stats, which we did see for a couple customers, and those were addressed. This context, of course, as you can see, as we're talking about, is so important as you go to troubleshoot to identify root cause. But in the case of this customer, we were able to see very quickly that they're doing their work. There's nothing exceptional about it. They didn't have a million windows open. They were using a ton of resources. On the server side of things, we had to prove also that there is not a storage level problem, which we've seen where backups are causing issues, or there's not a resource contention issue that might be exacerbating the problem as well. We were able to prove that CPU memory utilization was within bounds. The CPU, context switches, no queue length, it wasn't paging like crazy, which means that maybe it overran the cache on RAM from PVS. So we can tell and identify what those circumstances were happening. Disk performance was great. We had a case with a customer where the slowness was actually, yes, they had slow connection speed, but they also had 4,000 milliseconds of storage latency, which of course isn't going to manifest in ICA latency, but it is a back-end issue. So as they were having these tiger teams with all these different constituents around, we were able to provide this evidence to show that, the only place that these problems are manifesting was with the connection speed itself. So they went and actually improved the connection speed. They bumped it up from a 10 megabit connection for about 150 users, which is not that much, to a 150 megabit connection, which is great. But what was interesting when that happened, we still heard complaints about slowness. And when we came back into here, we're now seeing some higher network latency values. Actually, the network latency, I'm sorry, was a little bit less, is around 190 milliseconds, so it's gotten better. But the connection speed was down to around 100 kilobit per second, 200 kilobit per second. And so as we're seeing this information, we're again able to prove that from the Citrix side of things, everything is fine, but connection speed is worse. So there's still a problem on the connection side, on the network side of things. That told us, tied back to the data we had from here, that the client address and their whole scope had changed. They were on a 172.168.200 bit range, and now all of a sudden they were on a 10 dot something range. And so we took that back to them, the two data points that stood out very quickly. It turned out all those users were now, when they got new bandwidth, they also got new endpoints, and those endpoints were coming in over Wi-Fi, which is why they had the IP address that they had, which is why it was so slow. Put them on the wire, disable the wireless. We were able to prove that immediately that connection speed was great and good in the way that it should have been. So this was really important to kind of bringing all that data back together to understand exactly what was happening and proving all of that too. So this is kind of a quick summary, bringing together the data from the connection side of things, the protocol, the back-end infrastructure side was really important to be able to get down to the root cause of those conditions. We have one more use case before we get into Q&A, and so this was one of our customers, UHS. Now they have a hosted application at Cerner that had a number of different issues that were taking place. One, they had no visibility to what was happening performance-wise. The other challenge was that when users called in, because of the hosted app, oftentimes the complaint would come in, local IT, to the best of their ability, would try to identify if it was a local issue or not, and then it would get kicked up to the hosting provider. It could take as much as 48 hours before they got a answer back, whether it was something on their side or not. So it was taking a long time to troubleshoot. Users were complaining about experience, and they couldn't figure out when there's problems before users came in, if it was an availability issue, or when the problems took place, where to actually identify the root cause to. So we gave them a visibility. We actually deployed our technology to over 30 different locations, running on an uninterrupted basis every, I believe, 15 minutes, launching every single application to confirm that it's up and working the way that it should be. Now this was important because when we went back into our technology and we were taking a look at the availability of their environment, they would get calls up from users from the whole site and say, look, we've tested, we have 300 users, doctors and nurses, no one can get in. And so looking at our dashboard, we'd be able to see, is the overall availability good or not? Is it at 100%, looking at the right-hand side, for that environment? And inevitably there'd be something that was down or not, and maybe it would be down to 80% or so. And so they'd go into the analysis page and look through these conditions. Now there was a very specific circumstance, much as I was saying, 200, 300 users that are down. They came into this part of the product. They isolated back to the specific endpoint because they had a list here, and this could be changed, the name of it. It had every single hospital location. They picked just that hospital, and it brought up all the simulations running throughout the day for that time frame. This updated accordingly to show all the simulations. It showed 100% up. Digging down into them, even some of the ones that were longer, just in case maybe users were not patient, they could see each step of the way. Was there some error messages popping up that might be indicative? There was nothing like that. Everything was fine. It was loading up quickly. This gave them the objective evidence to say, look, this is not a Cerner problem. This is not a Citrix issue. This is something with your location, and we have technology at that site that's actually running and has no problems whatsoever. Because the site and the user and the IT admins were forced to look back internally, they found that all of those users were coming in over a Wi-Fi connection. And all those users are coming in through one access point. And so no one can get in because no one can even get online properly, and that's what was causing those issues. Now, if they've gone through the normal set of events and they've gotten that initial feedback, they would have passed it up to Cerner. It would have taken 48 hours. Obviously nothing on the Cerner side, maybe 72 hours, pass it back down. So the time to resolution would have been days and days and days. Instead, it was reported in the morning around 8:30. They had the answer back to them at 8:35 saying that, hey, this is not a problem on our side. We're not seeing any issues. Here's proof that it works from your side, and it worked fine. They even waited for the next simulation run that was running a couple minutes later and quickly had information to show that, hey, everything is still okay. You need to focus on what's going on with those users from your infrastructure side of things. And by 10 o'clock, everything was resolved. They found the root cause of the problem and able to move and get things taken care of. So that was a huge win for them to be able to identify those circumstances. The other side of it was getting just pure visibility to what was going on from a Citrix perspective in the sessions that are being delivered. What they were able to see from this side of things was that they'd get random notifications back that something went down, whether it was the nurses' boards that told them about what was coming up with the different patients. This was all being delivered through a Citrix app going up into a big monitor on each one of the floors. They'd have problems with the users could be able to sign in. They had problems with applications going down. They needed to have objective evidence and find out, was this a problem on the Citrix side of things? Was it on the server side of things? Was it a Cerner problem? And this helped them get that visibility. Because in the case of slowness, they can look into these different conditions, find out, just like we've been doing here so far, what's happening inside of those sessions, and dig into that. Just simply drill down. They have information around the experience that was taking place, those details, and get back what was going on. Profile loading, they had issues with domain controllers on their side, that the routing was going wrong or was going to the wrong domain controller. They could see exactly which one. That helped them get some of those details, and then have some evidence as far as experience. One of those items was less on the Citrix side of things, but being able to get down to that host itself to see what's performance like on the host. So they could see here very quickly what's going on from a resource consumption. Is it overloaded beyond what was supposed to be happening inside of that environment? And so we'd get visibility to all the different app servers, number of concurrent users, there's something disabled. This gives a quick load of visibility to the average. Does that app server load, the number of users and sessions that are out there, and get an idea of what's taking place. At the same time, they'll to flow that visibility back into the alerting that we had. So when they came back into the dashboard, they could see very quickly what was actually going on inside of the different systems. So they could see if there was a number of servers that are fine and other ones that are not, and then drill down and focus on those. So they can actually see some of those events that were taking place if relevant. And that would provide the type of visibility to understand what was going on with respect to any alerts or faults that were happening, whether performance issues. They would see processes that were crashing, that get faults and alerts back. We also have built-in log management, so it allowed them to see very quickly what was happening from an alerting perspective and see some of those lower-level events, whether it was mapping issues and policy-related or application crashes and errors that were being sent. Some of those application crashes would include detail as far as what was the core event that was happening around it, the component or module that was broken, so they could copy and paste information out of here, paste it into an email and say, look, we're seeing all these application crashes, they're all preceded by this event. And so they have a tool that's allowing them to filter and pull the information together in one central area and then alert on that information and send it back. So for them, getting proactive about this was having visibility to their hosted environment plus on-prem and all the characteristics in between, such that they were able to go back to the relevant users or the relevant party that was responsible or would be able to take a fix action in a very intelligent fashion, a very strategic manner with evidence in hand. So the combination being able to see the Citrix side of things, being able to pull back information from the hypervisor, from the host, from the application layer, and being able to prove how resource conditions were contributing to that or not contributing to that from a connection perspective was important to be able to see which sites were having problems, who was down, who was not, have objective evidence, and then be able to drill down a little bit deeper into those root causes. So these different use cases, some of the key takeaways that you should take is the fact that our technology and architecture has the ability to be deployed to any location. It has that flexibility, any location and any platform. So it doesn't have to have requirements of like building SSL tunnels and VPN connections. If you've got sites that are disparate and broken apart and they connect into the Citrix environment or your infrastructure over the internet, we would follow that same path and provide you with visibility to the experience that those users are having in each one of those sites and bring in the data from deeper down into the architecture to help support that. Whether it's with the healthcare customers that we've talked about in the beginning and the airline that needed to have deployment out to the different sites and locations to understand regionally what was happening and have objective evidence, to being able to drill down and provide and troubleshoot logon duration issues like with MTM, identify slowness problems that are taking place with those users, get down to the root cause of connection speed issues, and be able to prove evidence that it's not on the Citrix side of things and show how that's running fine and where they need to focus their attention to. Or in this case, let's be able to have a combination of all of that pulled together and have a single console. So, Shashi, we've talked a little bit about the different use cases, about the approach about being proactive, but I think there might be perhaps some questions out there. This might be a good time to go through those.
Yes, Lee. Thanks. Thanks for this presentation. I think a lot of information was shared from this, and we have like good number of questions as well. Okay, so to start with, the first question is, what version of Citrix does this work with, and does it monitor multiple farms?
That's a great question. So we have a lot of customers that have multiple farms, and often individual customers that have multiple versions. So answering in reverse, we do support multiple farms, multiple environments, so you can have multiple sites coming in. In the case of like a service provider or DaaS provider for different customers, we have architecture that can go to those different sites, collect information with those individual sites, and you can manage them on a per customer basis and multiple sites within each of those customers. For customers that have deployments inside their environment with multiple farms, again, you'll come into a single console, see all of it pulled together so you can actually drill down through it. We've had cases with customers that launch sessions from, say, a 7.x desktop into a 6.5 app. You'll be able to see all that whole chain and all those different components pulled together in the views that we provide. As far as the versions that are supported, we support from 4.5 all the way up to 7.15, the current versions that Citrix has out there and posted on the website, and all the different hypervisor versions below that too.
Okay, right. Thank you. So the next one follows. We are currently a hybrid model, but I am in the process of migrating to the cloud from on-prem. Can you easily support the migration as VMs move to EC2 instances?
Absolutely, and we've seen cases where customers either move those VMs through the actual connectors themselves, actually bursting them back up there, or and part of that challenge relates to when they're coming into the EC2, it might not have an actual connector. We can actually still support that. We can still hold a connection back to the Goliath server and the connection itself. We have a technology put out there that all the assets that are up in the cloud will connect up to that proxy, that master agent that we have, and from there connect back into our server as they move from on-prem up to the cloud itself. So we can still monitor all those EC2 instances and all your on-prem instances at the same time and help you keep that data organized in our environment so you can keep the Amazon stuff organized as Amazon and the on-prem pieces as on-prem so you can manage them in that fashion too.
Okay, great. I think the next question follows the earlier one. It says, do I need to reconfigure agents when I move workloads to the cloud?
You don't. Generally, what we've seen is one of two things that happen. Either they just move it up to the cloud and there is a connector, so all the other architecture pieces stay the same, and that's absolutely fine. There's no reconfiguration necessary. We are template and gold image ready, so if they take the other approach of reprovisioning up in the cloud, when they make the changes that are relevant for like the new DDC, if there is one, our agents are image-based, so they will simply adopt those settings from that level as well and maintain a connection to whatever assets they need to retain a connection to. So you don't really need to modify anything unless you're completely rebuilding your entire architecture, and even then you have to make a single change in line with the other changes that you're making. The goal is to really make it kind of easy for you as you make that transition. The one thing you don't need to really worry about is the Goliath performance monitoring and Goliath application availability monitoring side of things.
Thanks. So we'll take up the last question as we're almost through with the time. So do you support Citrix Cloud?
So that's a great question. One of the things that we've always done is made an effort to support the Citrix environment itself and any major changes that Citrix is taking. That's including Citrix Cloud itself. And so we are going to be releasing support for Citrix Cloud, and if customers are interested in that, I encourage them to reach out to us. We are working with customers on that right now.
Okay. Thanks, Lee, for taking up the questions. So before we wrap up this webinar, anything you would like to summarize or convey to our audience?
No, we appreciate you reaching out to us and joining the webinar itself. If you have any questions, and if there's anything else you'd like to dig into deeper, a question about how this might apply to your environment, I encourage you to reach out to us at GoliathTechnologies.com. There's a support site. You can reach out to us to the chat function there. You can give us a call or reach out to us on Twitter or on LinkedIn as well. And more than happy to speak with you about how our technology might apply to your environment. Again, just appreciate you joining the webinar today. And Shashi, appreciate Citrix hosting us and supporting us.
Welcome, Lee. And thanks for this wonderful presentation and taking up the time to answer the questions as well. As I mentioned, in the interest of the time, we may have to conclude this webinar now, but we have a lot of questions that we will be posting you, and we will also reach out to the audience with the answers. And we will also send the recording of this video along with the slides to all the audience as well. Okay. So with that said, thank you everyone for joining this webinar.